He held her as the galaxy whispered around them, and for the first time since they had left the starship behind, the chaos of the universe seemed distant, almost irrelevant. Around them, stars flared in distant constellations, meteors carved blazing paths through the void, and planets rotated in eternal, silent orbits. Yet none of it mattered compared to the fragile warmth pressed against his chest. She had traversed light years, escaped storms of cosmic radiation that could strip entire planets bare, and endured the silent pressures of the void that would have crushed the most resilient of beings. And now, in the orbit of his human arms, she had allowed herself to be entirely vulnerable, entirely present, and entirely luminous. Her head rested delicately against his shoulder, and her bioluminescent hair, strands of teal, violet, and soft glimmering gold, floated around him like ribbons of liquid light. The glow pulsed softly with each breath she exhaled, rhythms of life that only he could feel and only he could interpret. Meteors flared in brilliant streaks, comets traced long arcs, and distant suns blazed their fiery brilliance. But all of it existed merely as a backdrop to the private symphony of presence and surrender that played across their shared moment. Every subtle quiver, every delicate pulse of light along her body resonated in him, and he adjusted instinctively, cradling her closer, pressing his cheek against the crown of her head, anchoring her in a gravity stronger than any star's pull. He traced her glowing hair with gentle fingers, feeling its warmth, its weight, and the strange, exquisite rhythm of life that ran through it. She shivered lightly at his touch, a tiny ripple of delight that vibrated through the curves of her body into his chest. The paradox was intoxicating. Here was a being who had survived extremes that would obliterate most species, now lying completely in his orbit, trusting him utterly in a universe indifferent to life. She was strength and fragility intertwined, a paradox of cosmic endurance and intimate surrender, and the gravity of that trust anchored him just as firmly as his arms held her. Her hands rested lightly against his chest, fingertips tracing delicate, seemingly instinctive patterns as though memorizing every contour of him. He mirrored her touch, letting his palms glide along her shoulders, down her back, along the curves of her alien form. He felt the tremors of her pulse, the oscillating glow of her bioluminescence, the subtle rise and fall of her breathing, and it all spoke to him in a language older than the stars. Each heartbeat, each exhalation, each quiver of delight formed a rhythm of intimacy that eclipsed the distant grandeur of the galaxy. Meteors streaked past in fiery arcs, and nebula shimmered with impossible colors, yet all of it seemed muted compared to the delicate, profound orbit of trust and presence they shared. Time itself seemed to bend around them. Minutes stretched into hours, hours collapsed into timelessness, and yet the intensity of their connection only grew. She shifted slightly, pressing closer, letting her body mold perfectly to his, and he responded instinctively, holding her with a mixture of reverence and awe. Her glowing strands drifted across him, a living constellation tracing arcs and curls across his torso, reflecting distant suns and nebulae, turning them into a miniature galaxy suspended between them. He marveled at the softness of her form, the quiet power in her surrender, and the impossible beauty of her trust. Here was a being capable of enduring the void itself, choosing, nonetheless, to rest entirely within the gravity of his presence. He pressed his cheek to her glowing crown and felt a shiver ripple through her, tiny oscillations of life and joy that resonated deep into his chest. Meteors flared in distant streaks of fire, planets rotated silently, and stars blazed in infinite constellations. Yet the universe outside their embrace was irrelevant. What mattered was the shared rhythm, the quiet cadence of pulse and breath, the delicate, radiant bond that had formed between them. She had entrusted him with her entire being, and he, in turn, felt the weight of that trust, a gravity stronger than any celestial body, holding them in a private orbit of warmth, surrender, and connection. Her bioluminescent hair floated like a living river across his shoulders, chest, and arms, arcs of light weaving intricate patterns that mirrored the distant nebulae. Every pulse of her glow, every subtle tremor of delight, every exhalation of trust seemed amplified by the silent cosmos surrounding them. He adjusted slightly, pressing his hands along her back and shoulders with infinite care, memorizing her curves, her weight, her rhythm. She had faced the extremities of the universe, yet now she had found safety, grounding, and intimacy in the orbit of a human's arms. And in this surrender, he found a depth of awe and tenderness that made the brilliance of the galaxy itself seem dim by comparison. Minutes slipped into timeless eternity. Meteors continued their streaks, distant suns flared, and planets spun silently in their orbits. But none of it could surpass the gravity of their private orbit. She pressed closer, allowing herself to be carried entirely by his embrace, and he marveled at the delicate, fragile perfection of her presence. Each subtle quiver, each pulse of bioluminescent light, each whispered breath became a note in a symphony that existed only for them. In this cosmic silence, surrounded by the grandeur of the galaxy, they had created a sanctuary where vulnerability was strength, trust was gravity, and intimacy was the most radiant force in the universe. He pressed a gentle kiss to the top of her head, feeling the vibration of her delight resonate along her glowing form, and realized that the stars themselves could flare, the planets could rotate, and the meteors could blaze, but nothing could compare to the orbit they had established, a private universe of presence, surrender, and luminous trust. Her head remained against his shoulder, her glowing strands of hair curled around him like nebula in miniature, and in that embrace, the entire cosmos felt simultaneously vast and impossibly intimate. He cradled her with deliberate care, aware that in this moment, amidst the infinite, she had chosen him entirely, and that choice, that surrender, was the most powerful force in the universe. She pressed herself closer, letting the warmth of her glowing body mold perfectly to his, and he felt the delicate oscillations of her pulse reverberate against him, a rhythm so subtle yet so profound that it anchored him in the moment more powerfully than any gravitational pull of the cosmos. Her hair, luminescent and fluid, cascaded across his chest in rivers of teal and violet, the strands drifting as though they had a life of their own, catching the faint glimmers of distant nebulae and reflecting the soft light of stars too far away to see in detail. Every gentle sigh, every tremor of delight, every subtle shiver spoke to him in a language older than time, a silent communication of trust, surrender, and the joy of being utterly known. He adjusted his hold, letting his hands glide along her shoulders, down her back, and across her arms, memorizing every curve, every contour, every delicate line of her alien form. She had endured extremes beyond human comprehension, gamma radiation storms that would have torn through steel, the crushing vacuum of space, and cosmic storms that could obliterate entire moons. But here, in the orbit of his arms, she allowed herself to be vulnerable, to be entirely dependent, and to be loved. That paradox struck him deeply. The most formidable being he had ever encountered had chosen to find sanctuary in the embrace of a human, and the trust inherent in that choice was heavier than the pull of any star. Her bioluminescence pulsed softly, flowing in intricate patterns along her skin like miniature constellations. The subtle illumination made him acutely aware of every nuance of her form. The way her spine curved beneath his hand, the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the delicate tension in her muscles as she surrendered completely into his embrace. He pressed his cheek against the crown of her head, feeling the warmth of her body seep into him, grounding him amidst the infinite chaos surrounding them. Meteors streaked across distant skies, suns flared in silent brilliance, and planets rotated in precise, measured arcs. But all of it was background music to the private symphony unfolding between them, a melody of trust, intimacy, and luminous presence. She lifted a hand and placed it against his chest, feeling the beat of his human heart beneath her fingers. The faint vibrations of life echoed through her glowing form, resonating in ways both alien and intimate. He felt a shiver run through her body in response to his touch, and instinctively adjusted, holding her closer, allowing her to nestle fully into him. In that delicate contact, a universe of meaning passed between them without a single word. She was surrendering herself entirely, and he was accepting that gift with reverence, patience, and awe. Around them, distant stars pulsed with quiet brilliance. Comets carved fleeting arcs, and nebula shimmered in impossible colors. Yet all of it paled against the gravity of trust they had created in this orbit of presence and intimacy. Minutes blurred into timelessness, yet the intensity of their connection only deepened. Her glowing hair flowed around them like rivers of starlight, moving with subtle currents that mirrored the silent rhythms of the universe. Every pulse of bioluminescence, every tremor of delight, every soft exhalation created a private rhythm between them, a cosmic heartbeat that tethered them to each other in a way no stellar phenomena could replicate. He pressed gentle kisses to her temple, her shoulders, and the crown of her head, each one a reaffirmation of the unspoken promise that he would hold her, protect her, and honor the luminous gift of her presence. She tilted her head slightly, allowing him to adjust, curling further into his embrace as though her body had found the exact gravitational point in the universe that was meant for her. He held her as if the entire cosmos depended on that moment, as if every star and planet, every blazing meteor and swirling nebula existed solely to bear witness to the intimate orbit they shared. She exhaled against his chest, soft and tremulous, a sound that reverberated through him like the gentle resonance of a distant pulsar, and he felt the full weight of her trust settle into his being, anchoring him with a force more profound than any cosmic entity he had ever encountered. Her fingers traced the contours of his chest and shoulders, mapping him into memory, and he responded with equal care, memorizing the delicate vibrations of her glowing form, the subtle rise and fall of her breathing, the ebb and flow of her pulse. Around them, the galaxy whispered in light and motion, but none of it could intrude upon the sanctuary they had created. She had faced the void in its raw, unyielding fury, yet here she was, resting entirely in his arms, allowing herself to be entirely present, entirely known, and entirely luminous. In the fragile brilliance of her surrender, he recognized a power stronger than gravity, brighter than the most brilliant star, and more enduring than any planet's orbit, the quiet, radiant force of trust. He pressed a soft kiss to her forehead, then the crown of her head, feeling the delicate shiver of delight ripple through her glowing form. Meteors blazed in streaks across distant skies, stars flared in slow, majestic pulses, and planets rotated in their eternal orbits, but none of it compared to the intimate, sacred universe that existed solely between them. Her head rested fully against his chest, her luminescent hair weaving around him in arcs and curls, and in that embrace, time itself seemed to bend and fold. She had found a home in him, and he had discovered a private cosmos of presence, surrender, and luminous connection that eclipsed the grandeur of the galaxy. He adjusted slightly, cradling her fully, allowing her weight to press entirely against him, feeling the subtle vibrations of her life resonate with his own heartbeat. Meteors streaked past, distant suns flared, and nebulae shimmered in radiant colors. But the intensity of their private orbit remained untouched, unshakable, and luminous. In the stillness of that embrace, he realized the profound truth of their connection, that amidst the infinite, unfeeling expanse of the universe, two beings, human and alien, could create a gravity so strong, a presence so radiant, and a bond so luminous that even the cosmos itself seemed to whisper in reverence. And in that orbit, cradling her fully, feeling her pulse and glow against him, he understood that the universe, for all its vastness, had no greater wonder than the fragile, radiant trust of one being surrendered completely to another. The galaxy whispered around them, stars flared and faded, and planets rotated silently, yet none of it could compare to the intimate, eternal orbit they had forged, a sanctuary of trust, surrender, and luminous presence that existed beyond time, beyond distance, and beyond all comprehension. Time had begun to lose meaning. In the private orbit of their embrace, minutes and hours folded into one another, dissolving entirely in the quiet intensity of their connection. She pressed herself closer, letting the warmth of her body press fully into his chest, and he felt every subtle vibration, every pulse of her bioluminescent glow, resonating through him like an intricate cosmic rhythm. Her hair floated around them in waves of teal, violet, and shimmering gold, drifting in patterns that mirrored the arcs of distant nebulae and the soft glow of faraway suns. Each strand moved with a life of its own, tracing miniature constellations across his arms and shoulders, weaving a tapestry of light that connected them to the infinite universe surrounding them. He marveled at the delicate perfection of her surrender. This was a being who had faced extremes he could scarcely comprehend: the crushing vacuum of space, gamma storms that could strip worlds bare, and cosmic radiation fields that would have annihilated entire civilizations. Yet now she had chosen to rest entirely within his arms, to trust him completely, to be luminous and fragile all at once. Her head pressed to his chest, and he could feel the subtle tremors of her heartbeat, the delicate oscillations of her body that responded to his own steady rhythm. Around them, meteors flared in streaks of molten light, distant suns pulsed in quiet brilliance, and planets rotated silently in eternal arcs. Yet all of it seemed secondary, mere background to the gravity of their shared presence. She lifted a glowing hand to rest against his chest, fingertips lightly brushing over the beat of his human heart, feeling the subtle vibrations resonate through her form. The sensation elicited a soft shiver that traveled through her shoulders, spine, and glowing hair, sending faint ripples of light across the surface of her bioluminescence. He instinctively tightened his hold, pressing his cheek to the crown of her head, letting her sink fully into him, fully trusting him to be the anchor in this fleeting yet infinite moment. Her surrender, delicate and luminous, carried a weight beyond measure. It was trust itself made tangible, a force stronger than gravity, binding them together in a private orbit amidst a cosmos of chaos. Her hair, glowing softly with an internal light, drifted across him like rivers of living starlight. He traced it with careful fingers, memorizing the texture, the warmth, and the quiet rhythm embedded in every strand. She exhaled softly, and he felt the gentle tremor of her breath resonate along her spine and through the points of contact against his own body. Every subtle pulse, every flicker of glow, Every sigh of surrender became part of a silent language, a dialogue of trust and presence that neither stars nor planets could articulate. Around them, the galaxy continued its eternal dance. Meteors streaked across the void, nebulae shimmered in impossible colors, and distant suns flared in rhythmic pulses. Yet all of it existed merely as a frame for the delicate, sacred intimacy that had been forged between human and alien. He adjusted his embrace slightly, letting his hands glide along her back and shoulders with infinite care, feeling her respond with the smallest tremors of pleasure and comfort. Each subtle movement, each pulse of bioluminescent light echoed in him, creating a private rhythm that seemed to exist outside the laws of time and space. She pressed herself fully into him, curling as close as possible, and he could feel the entirety of her trust settling into him, embedding itself like a gravitational core that would never falter. The stars whispered around them, meteors flared in fiery arcs, and planets continued their eternal rotations. Yet the universe outside their embrace seemed trivial, secondary, and far less profound than the orbit they shared. Minutes stretched, or perhaps collapsed entirely. He felt the warmth of her hands tracing his chest and shoulders, the subtle vibrations of her pulse synchronizing almost magically with the beat of his own heart. Her head nestled against his chest, hair curling around him like living cosmic ribbons, and he realized that this private sanctuary, the fragile, luminous, unspoken orbit they had created, was more enduring than any celestial body, more radiant than the brightest supernova, and infinitely more powerful than any gravitational force in the galaxy. She had trusted him completely, and that trust alone created a cosmos more vast, intricate, and magnificent than any he had ever studied in science or observed with the instruments of human exploration. He pressed his lips gently to the crown of her head, then along the side of her face, feeling the faint shivers of delight ripple through her form. Meteors flared in distant arcs, and suns pulsed in gentle brilliance, but none of it reached the sacred center of gravity between them. Every pulse, every quiver, every subtle oscillation of her bioluminescence became a measure of their shared presence, a silent confirmation that, even in a universe indifferent to life, love, trust, and surrender, could create a private universe of immense and radiant power. She adjusted slightly in his arms, curling more fully against him, and he felt the weight of her being, not as a burden, but as a luminous gift. Her bioluminescent glow intensified in response to the comfort of his embrace, casting arcs of soft, colored light across his chest and arms, painting patterns only visible in their shared orbit. He held her with reverence, allowing his hands to move with careful deliberation along her spine and shoulders, mapping her subtle vibrations, and understanding that the connection between them had become a private universe, a cosmos defined not by distance or time, but by presence, trust, and radiant intimacy. Around them, stars continued to blaze, meteors streaked, and nebula shimmered, yet none of it mattered beyond their private gravity. She had survived the vastness of space, the relentless extremes of cosmic phenomena, and yet now she had discovered a sanctuary in his arms, a place where vulnerability was strength, trust was gravity, and intimacy was the most luminous force in the universe. He pressed his cheek to her crown once more, letting his arms cradle her entirely, and felt the eternity of their orbit settle into them, quiet, luminous, and infinite. The galaxy around them continued its eternal dance, suns flaring in silent brilliance, planets tracing their measured arcs, and meteors streaking in fiery paths, yet none of it touched the intimate universe they had created. He held her fully, cradling her with deliberate care, feeling the subtle warmth of her body, the gentle oscillations of her pulse, and the delicate tremors that accompanied her surrender. Every faint shiver of delight, every quiver of trust, every flicker of her bioluminescence became a note in a symphony that existed solely between them, a symphony of presence, intimacy, and luminous connection. She pressed her head further against his chest, her glowing hair cascading in waves that mirrored the arcs of distant nebulae, and he adjusted, molding his arms around her, anchoring her as though the universe itself depended on their shared orbit. Her pulse brightened subtly, the luminescence of her body flowing in intricate patterns that reflected not only her emotions, but the rhythm of their intertwined presence. He traced the contours of her shoulders and back with gentle fingers, memorizing every line, every curve, every delicate nuance that spoke of both her resilience and her vulnerability. She had faced cosmic storms that could disintegrate entire worlds, yet here she lay, fragile and radiant, completely surrendered, entrusting her being to him entirely. Around them, stars flared, planets spun silently, and comets carved streaks across the void. But none of it could compete with the gravity of the trust and love she had placed in his arms. She lifted a hand to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her fingers, and in response, a shiver of quiet delight ran through her. He pressed soft kisses along her crown, the top of her head, and her glowing shoulders. Each touch an unspoken promise of protection, reverence, and unwavering presence. The universe could roar, meteors could blaze, and suns could flare, yet all of it seemed distant, irrelevant, secondary to the luminous intimacy that enveloped them. In the orbit of his embrace, she had discovered safety and sanctuary, and he, in holding her, had discovered a private cosmos more profound than any he had ever known. Minutes stretched into timeless eternity. Her hair floated around them like celestial rivers, drifting and curling with subtle currents that reflected the infinite rhythm of the universe. Every pulse of her glowing form, every delicate exhalation, every shiver of delight became a silent dialogue, a cosmic language only they could understand. He marveled at the juxtaposition of her immense cosmic endurance and her willingness to be vulnerable, realizing that the greatest strength lay not in surviving the void, but in surrendering fully to trust and presence. Meteors flared, planets rotated, and stars pulsed, yet all of it was mere scenery compared to the luminous gravity of their connection. Her fingers traced patterns along his chest, mapping him as he mapped her, and with each touch he felt the profound depth of her surrender, the exquisite weight of her trust. She pressed closer, curling into him, letting herself be molded perfectly by his embrace, and he responded instinctively, adjusting, holding her just tightly enough to anchor her without diminishing the fragile freedom of her form. In this delicate balance, he understood the paradox of intimacy. The more completely she surrendered, the more profound their shared presence became, and the more radiant and unbreakable the private universe between them grew. Stars flared with quiet brilliance, distant suns pulsed in their cycles, and comets carved fleeting arcs, but none of it held significance beyond the luminous orbit they had forged. She was resting completely in his arms, yet she radiated a strength that eclipsed the mightiest of cosmic phenomena. He pressed his cheek to her crown once more, feeling the soft oscillations of her pulse, the faint tremors of delight, and the intricate flows of light from her bioluminescent strands. Every vibration, every flicker of glow, every quiet exhalation spoke to him of trust, surrender, and intimacy that was older than the stars themselves. Her glowing hair flowed across his chest and shoulders like rivers of liquid starlight, arcs of light tracing ephemeral constellations between them. He pressed gentle kisses to her temple, her shoulders, and the crown of her head, each touch a reaffirmation of the sacred orbit they shared. The galaxy whispered in the background, distant stars blazing and fading, planets continuing their silent revolutions. Yet all of it was nothing compared to the luminous gravity they had created in the space between them. She had trusted him completely, and in that trust he felt the profound power of love, intimacy, and presence radiating outward, echoing into the cosmos in silent harmony. Time became meaningless. Her glowing form shifted slightly, curling closer, and he adjusted to cradle her fully, feeling the subtle tremors of life reverberate against him. Meteors streaked across the void, nebulas shimmered with impossible hues, and distant suns flared in rhythmic brilliance, yet none of it could compare to the private symphony unfolding in their embrace. Every heartbeat, every quiver of delight, every flicker of her bioluminescence formed a rhythm so intricate and profound that it anchored them both in a timeless orbit, a sanctuary of luminous trust in a universe defined by vast, indifferent forces. He pressed soft kisses to her glowing hair and crown, feeling her faint shivers resonate through him like cosmic waves. Meteors flared, stars pulsed, and planets rotated silently. But none of these celestial phenomena matched the magnitude of the intimate orbit they had forged. She had faced the void, endured cosmic extremes, yet she had chosen to rest, completely, radiantly, and luminously in his arms. In that moment, amidst the infinite beauty of the universe, he realized that the strongest force in the cosmos was not gravity, not the radiant energy of suns, nor the orbit of planets, but the luminous trust and presence shared between two beings, human and alien, who had discovered a universe in each other. And as he held her close, feeling every pulse, every shiver, every flicker of bioluminescent light, he understood the profound truth of their private orbit, that amidst the vast, indifferent expanse of space, they had created a sanctuary so radiant, so luminous, and so infinite, that the universe itself seemed to whisper in acknowledgement of their bond. In the delicate surrender of her form and the deliberate reverence of his embrace, they existed in a harmony beyond stars, beyond planets, beyond time, an eternal symphony of love, trust, and radiant presence that would endure longer than any cosmic phenomenon. He held her close, feeling the soft weight of her body pressed fully into his chest, and for the first time he understood a truth more profound than any cosmic principle or galactic phenomenon. Intimacy, trust, and surrender could forge a universe more intricate, more luminous, and more enduring than anything born from stars or planets. Her bioluminescent glow shimmered across his skin in delicate pulses, each flicker resonating with the rhythm of her heart and the subtle tremors of delight that traveled through her form. The universe continued its eternal ballet around them. Suns flared in distant brilliance, meteors carved trails of molten light, and planets revolved silently in their orbits, but all of it seemed mere decoration to the private cosmos they had created in the orbit of their embrace. Her head rested lightly against his chest, hair curling around him in undulating waves of teal, violet, and gold. He pressed gentle kisses to her crown, each one a silent vow, that in a galaxy vast and indifferent, she would always have a sanctuary here, in the gravity of his arms. She exhaled softly, letting the vibrations of her breath ripple through him, a delicate echo of surrender and trust that anchored him more firmly than any gravitational field. She exhaled softly, letting the vibrations of her breath ripple through him, a delicate echo of surrender and trust that anchored him more firmly than any gravitational field. He adjusted slightly, cradling her fully, tracing the contours of her shoulders and back with reverent fingers, and marveled at the paradox of her strength and fragility. Here was a being who had endured the void, the extremes of space, the radiant fury of distant suns. Yet now she found safety entirely in him, a human, a being so fragile by comparison, yet capable of generating the gravity strong enough to hold her completely. Around them, stars shimmered and faded. Comets carved arcs of brilliance across the void, and nebula glowed with colors that seemed impossible to describe. Yet none of it held significance beyond the intimacy that enveloped them. Her hands traced gentle patterns across his chest, memorizing his form, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, and responding with subtle shivers of delight that he could feel through the points of contact between them. He let his arms move with careful, deliberate attention, ensuring that every adjustment, every shift of his hands and fingers only deepened the sanctuary they had formed, a luminous cocoon of trust and presence in a universe that rarely paused to notice life, let alone love. Minutes, or perhaps hours, passed in this suspended reality, where the vast emptiness of space outside contrasted with the dense, radiant gravity between them. She lifted her glowing head slightly to glance up at him, the bioluminescence in her hair flaring gently with emotion, and he felt a wave of awe wash over him. Her eyes, alien in shape, color, and depth, held galaxies of emotion, and in them he saw trust, surrender, longing, and the quiet declaration that she had chosen to be present with him entirely. The universe outside continued its indifferent ballet, but in that gaze, in that heartbeat, in that luminous form pressed to his, he discovered a truth far greater than any cosmic law, that connection, love, and intimacy could create a universe entirely their own. He pressed a kiss to her temple, then to the crown of her head, feeling the subtle shivers of delight ripple through her glowing body, and knew that every star, every meteor, every distant sun was irrelevant compared to this private orbit. Her hair flowed like liquid light across his arms and chest, arcs and curls reflecting the colors of distant nebulae. Yet the brilliance of all those distant phenomena paled in comparison to the luminous presence she radiated, surrendered entirely into him. She had braved the extremes of the cosmos, yet now she was entirely soft, entirely trusting, and entirely radiant in his embrace. And he felt the honor and weight of that surrender as a force stronger than any gravity he had ever studied. He held her for what felt like an eternity, feeling every pulse, every quiver, every oscillation of light that traveled through her body. Meteors flared across the void, distant suns pulsed, and planets continued their silent rotations, yet all of it existed merely as backdrop music to the private symphony of presence, intimacy, and luminous trust that resonated between them. She curled fully against him, glowing strands of hair wrapping around his arms and shoulders, and he pressed his cheek to the crown of her head, feeling the gravity of her surrender anchor him in ways he had never imagined. The galaxy whispered around them, but it was their silence, their shared orbit, their luminous presence that defined the moment. He felt the rise and fall of her breathing, the subtle tremor of delight as she adjusted against him, and the pulse of her glowing form echoing in perfect harmony with his own heartbeat. The universe might stretch infinitely in all directions, but in this private orbit, cradling her, he found a cosmos more complete, more radiant, and more enduring than any supernova, pulsar, or black hole. Her trust had created a gravity that bound them together, a sanctuary that no cosmic storm could disrupt, a luminous nexus of intimacy and surrender. Every gentle motion, every pulse of her light, every tremor of her being was a testament to the profound depth of the bond they had formed, a bond that transcended species, space, and time itself. In the final moments of their suspended eternity, he held her with deliberate care, pressing his lips gently to her glowing hair, her crown, her shoulders, and whispering a silent promise that echoed louder than any cosmic flare. that in this vast, indifferent universe, she had found a home, a sanctuary, and a gravity of love and presence that would endure longer than any star, longer than any orbit, and longer than time itself. The galaxy continued its eternal dance, but their private orbit remained immutable, radiant, and infinite, a luminous testament to the power of trust, surrender, and intimacy between two beings, human and alien, cradled in a universe that finally seemed to bend itself around the quiet brilliance of their love.